Right, hello everybody. Today it's Sunday, August the 4th. Today Mercury is stationing retrograde. However, I already recorded a bit of a video on that. I may do some more on that. There may be some things going on in this video which relate to Mercury retrograde. However, what I'm focusing on today is the square between Jupiter and Saturn. I guess you could make this about Mars and Jupiter together in Gemini. They've got 5 degrees apart. Jupiter is at 15 degrees Gemini, Mars is at 10 degrees Gemini, and Saturn is at 18 degrees of Pisces. And so that's the aspect I'm focusing on. And of course, that Gemini is a Mercury sign. So it's very much tied in, connected to the Mercury retrograde, which is going to happen. Now, going into this, one of the things that's on my mind is that yesterday, I guess I should also point out that it's it's a new moon in Leo today as I'm recording this as well. Although I've been taking an approach to my astrology videos where I'm spending less time on the lunations just for the sake of focusing on planetary aspects. That's just my style right now. And it could have been yesterday because it was a balsamic lunar phase that I was feeling kind of exhausted. Like there's this kind, and there's something usually about like the balsamic phase where it's kind of like letting go and just sort of like making space for this like new moon moment to create itself. But there's something there. I was feeling particularly kind of like burnt out or worn out, and I kind of felt like it had to do with maybe I was trying to keep up on the news, and there was just this sense of like so much stuff happening. And I think people have, you could look at what's recently happened with the American election. Basically, if you just look at like Biden dropping out and Kamala getting in, and combined with the recent attempted shooting on Trump, then that's like quite a lot of like developments and novel things happening. But if we take the focus off the American election, there's just been a whole lot of stuff happening, and I have, I'm not approaching this channel from the point of view of being just really on it with covering all the current events, but going into this, I feel like I am kind of like, a little bit overwhelmed by just how much stuff is going on. And I'm going to just give you a little rundown about it. There has been, I'm a Canadian guy in BC, and this isn't affecting me where I live, but in the interior, what happened was there was a landslide, which a whole bunch of stuff fell into the Chilcotin River, basically creating a kind of a natural dam, which is flooding a whole bunch of stuff in the interior. And basically what they're predicting is that the landslide which has blocked this river is eventually going to burst, and all this water is going to then spew out over so there may be they're evacuating a huge area in the interior of BC right now. And this is not the whole thing about landslides. We also are in forest fire season, and the problem with forest fires is that when the trees, the roots of the trees help to create a kind of protect against landslides, right? So when over the years, continual forest fires have a kind of a knock-on effect for creating a greater risk of landslides as well. So it's the landslide risk and the flooding thing is very much connected to climate change. And I thought I would start with this one anyways, because one of the things that I was doing, with this, trying to interpret what Saturn in Pisces is about, is that I was thinking about Saturn is often described as being a wall, and that Pisces is obviously a water sign, and it's in there with Neptune. And there's something about in a very just literal and mundane way, a landslide creating a natural wall or a natural dam, and then the square between Jupiter and Mars, like the Mars could be like the force of bursting through the dam, whereas so there's like in this Jupiter Mars conjunction in that square to Saturn, it kind of resonates both with the damming up of the river, and then the evacuation and the inevitable bursting through of the blocked river or whatever, right? Of the idea of blocks and obstacles, and then a lot of pressure building up to overcome blocks and obstacles, right? I thought that was pretty good. And I mean, also in there's some stuff that I just thought I'd mention that are maybe like less more local news but still maybe going with the Mercury retrograde, is that they in downtown Vancouver in Robson Street, they've inserted their first crosswalk that you can cross diagonally as well as just like crossing the street crossing the intersection as you normally would. And to me, this just seems like a bad idea to do this right before Mercury retrograde. There's bound to be some kind of an accident, but I don't know. And there's in a similar way, there's also a guy locally who is like flying a plane around, a Cessna, into like flight paths of other planes and like going around in circles. And it's just like there's a sense of just like total chaos and disorder and like I don't know, just kind of. But I mean, I don't mean to. So this is the local news, right? So there's also certain things going on with in more international news. The leader of the Hamas has recently been announced as being killed, and there is some sort of like, I'm not following this stuff very closely. If you want to get your news, you'd be best off not to get it from me. But I'm just the United States has dispatched an aircraft carrier to the Middle East and to support Israel with mounting conflicts against Iran, and there's this mounting conflict in the Middle East, anyways, as I'm sure you're all aware of. And that is, unfortunately, I don't know, I was feeling kind of bummed out yesterday, and sometimes I just have like a kind of a nebulous cloud of emotions that I don't know what I'm reacting to, but it's not looking very good in terms of peace right now. So that's one thing to keep in mind with this. I mean, Mars and Jupiter, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to just copy the astrology podcast, but I watched part of their episode the other day, and it's kind of obvious that Mars and Jupiter is not a really good combination for peaceful stuff happening, right? So that's a factor. And at the same time, you've got, in the UK, you've got all these like right-wing people protesting and rioting over a mass murder of children, which is, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's maybe it's reasonable to expect a certain amount of outrage over mass murder of children and stuff like that, but it's being politicized in such a way where, because the murderer was black, he's being falsely interpreted, or it's being spun in such a way that is being used as a reason not to trust immigrants and migrants and asylum seekers. But apparently the person in question was born in the UK. It wasn't an immigrant, wasn't a migrant, but just because there's a certain racial bias or racial element that's being utilized by the right wing for political purposes. And similarly, there's also I am not a person who's really into sports, right? And as such, I haven't been watching the Olympics. But it's come to my attention that, there's a certain controversy going on in the Olympics around female boxers. And there's something about this which is like, I was almost going to say something about this on social media, but I typed something out and then I just kind of, I feel like, the problem with Facebook is like, I feel like there's people that I know in real life who, I won't get into like the exact details or whatever, but that from my experience with certain people in real life, I have a certain kind of respect for people, right? But then there's something about like, it's not about like necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with what everybody posts on the internet, but I think it could just be due to the context of the medium that like, somebody who, if you were to have a conversation with them in real life, there'd be more nuance and there'd be more like getting into the whatever, like the details of the conversation and stuff like that. But like when it comes to like social media, what you get is like the person just like typing Kamala in all caps, and then or like it's just like people, and it's sort of like this idea that like people, I mean, if someone's working a job and somebody's busy and like people don't have time to go like write an essay on social media about what's going on, but it comes with the thing of these really like people aren't putting a lot of time and energy into what they're saying, and there's things in the media which has got everybody highly reactive, and it's sort of like I just sort of wonder sometimes that the way that social media is constructed, especially with stuff like Twitter, because like Twitter is an example of this, because the format of Twitter is you can't, if you want to write a paragraph or an essay, you have to post like a sequence of like tweets, then link them together, because the whole format is to have these like quick little like chirpy responses at each other, or so it's kind of like it kind of turns into this like, it kind of feels like in 2001 where the monkeys are at the watering hole and they're just like, it's like, it doesn't, or this is basically what Marshal McLuhan was talking about with the global village, right? In that the civilized society there's kind of like the dawning of a new Stone Age, where at the level of like everybody being connected by electricity, that people from other countries, other nations, the whole globe, turning into something that we're all just like sharing the same collective watering hole of the media, and that we're kind of like the new frontier of technology, of internet and social media and all that kind of stuff, is kind of like it goes back to the beginning and starts from this thing where we're all just like a bunch of monkeys who like hoot at each other around the and it's not really like, I don't really think that like, by what I just find anyways is that if I try to, even if I had the intention to post something a little bit more conscientious or intelligent or something like that, it just kind of feels like there's a force of gravity that's just like pulling you into the muck of like the highly reactive whatever in-group socializing, and which side are you on. I mean, it's, well, this kind of stuff, it's pretty it's, I'm not going to, I thought anyways, if I address these things in long format videos where I take the time to I try at least to be mindful and have a spirit of doing this in a kind of like mindful contemplation where I have a certain degree of presence and stuff like this. But I have to also admit that one of the things with this Mercury retrograde happening that has on my mind is that oftentimes when I record these videos, I'm just trying to like express this idea, and I'm often doing it in a way that's not perfect. Like I make mistakes, or I like, in trying to communicate something, I'm just trying to like get it out there, and I sometimes mix up what I'm going to say, and it's not, I mean, sometimes I'll watch my videos and I'll make corrections, but there's some things that are just like too complicated to really get into, and whatever, I don't know, there's something imperfect about the way I'm doing this. I've been also considering, like, I don't edit these videos, and you know, that maybe there's another way I could do videos that is more like making recordings and like editing them out, or then if I have to like, you know, spend more time unpacking something, or if I make a mistake, I can like re-record it or something. But that to me, like that, there's this idea of like an uninterrupted flow that honestly I'm a little bit inspired by people like Jack Kerouac. The idea that this kind of mentality of first thought, best thought, of like rather than just trying to like sitting with what you're going to say and like re-editing it, like on a, you know, you type something out, go back, you know, take things out, rewrite them, go back, right, and then eventually you just like delete the whole thing and throw it out, right? Like it's like more of just like I'm just going to record what I'm saying with all the imperfections and just like get it out there, rather than trying to like get all nitpicky about editing. And then there's also, I mean, I don't know, I was also thinking if I really got more serious about making content, you know, you could do it as a team, or where you could hire people to do the editing for you, and then you know, rather than taking it all upon yourself to do every part of the job or whatever, right? But I don't know if I'm quite there yet. I don't know, but I mean, it is what it is, right? There's something about all this. There's something about all this too, about the what I find interesting is that with all the like the sense of like just being overwhelmed and burnt out by all this stuff happening all at once, and it just feels, to me, it feels kind of odd that the thing about the boxer is getting so much attention, or at least there's also this kind of idea of like the objective truth about what's going on, and how people, like, everybody is seeing the world through filters, right? Everybody has their own filters, where we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, right? And oftentimes this has to do with certain kinds of like stories or narratives or ideas or beliefs, and that we're invested in these kinds of things that we keep either telling ourselves, or we keep having fed to us through whatever media we're connected to. And as a part of this, we don't see events that happen as they are. We're always trying to take what's happening and then fitting it into our personal subjective story, and taking an event which may not and this is the whole like political spin, right? Is that there's certain people that have, especially when you think of like, there are literal think tanks where people are paid. There are people who have lots of money, who have more money than they know what to do with, apparently, and what they pay people to come up with ideas that skew media in certain ways, to where, like, this is the whole thing that people complain. I think there's, you know, and this is both. I think this is both on the left wing and the right wing, and even if you there's something about, you know, I tend to be more left wing, but even you know, in this current climate, you can sort of, there's this feeling of things being constructed, or being like astroturfed, or like certain strategies to make certain arguments or to win political battles or whatever, that feel contrived. They don't feel like things that are just like you know, they don't, it doesn't feel, and there's this idea of authenticity, right? There's the idea of like, are people authentically themselves making these connections and associations, or is it like an effort to like, you know, let's all just say the same thing and like make it go viral in a kind of like contrived way? And this kind of goes beyond whether or not like I agree or disagree with the intention, but there's this kind of thing of like trying to and this, I mean, this very much goes along with like the Deleuze and Guattari idea of overcoding, of like taking whatever is happening in reality and then transcribing over it your own story to make whatever events are happening in reality fit your own story so you can push one agenda or another. And this is not to be said about whatever, the virtues of whatever agenda or whatever side you're taking, right? And I think there's something about this that it like whatever I'm trying to do with astrology is somehow related into this, because there's always the interpreting what's going on. There's some kind of like, of course I'm taking these, like, you can have your basic, your uninterpreted, planetary aspects, transits, or uninterpreted news events, and the process of like sense making or meaning making, that I'm taking all this in and making sense of it with my own personal story or my own narrative, or that which is maybe also informed by my own how I fit in to the collectivity of society or family or in social in groups or things like that, right? Though approaching it from the level of, and the thing, yeah, approaching it from the level of like just explaining it in a really simple way, what is actually going on, to me seems to be missing the point, right? Because I think there's something about all this where people are like, people talk about like mass psychosis, right? That people are not in touch with reality. People are more in touch with these stories or these narratives or these ideas or political agendas than they are with what's actually happening in reality, right? And there's something about, I mean, it's frustrating in different ways, because it's frustrating that like people can be so stupid, and or well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it helps to call people stupid, but I think it's like it's frustrating in the sense that I see like I refrained from doing anything on like posting anything on Facebook. Like I said, I almost did, and I decided it's probably better just not to feed into this hyper reactive thing. And I think this goes very much with to bring it back to the astrology, the Jupiter and Mars in Gemini, and the idea that like you've got, for example, in the Olympics a competitive, sporting events, but it's turning into something where like the idea that we all gather as spectators to watch these games play out, right? That are broadcasted around the world as a mass spectacle, and there's this big competition where one side fight, they're all competing for dominance or something. But it's like with Gemini is all about the dialogues and conversation and messages, and it's starting to seem like the real game is not is nobody really cares about who wins a boxing match or who wins who can run around a track fast. It's like there's a culture war, and it's like, how do we take these things that are maybe completely apolitical, but how do we take these to engineer them to serve some sort of political game that we're playing, that we're all stuck in, whether we want to or not, whether we want to be or not, right? Because this is the whole thing, is like, even if I decide, well, I don't know, I'm just noticing that like, I mean, there's this sort of attitude on social media of like, maybe if we just sort of like tell everybody what's happening and all share the same thing and create like a kind of a chorus where we're all just telling people what the truth is, then they will come to their senses, because they will listen. But that's not really what happens, is it? Right? And it's sort of like, does it really even help to, like, if I go and I try to explain things to you, and then this is the whole thing about like mansplaining or womansplaining or something like that. It doesn't really. There's something about like trying to have. Let's break it down. Let's explain what's going on, right? Like, there's something about this is like, do you really need people to do that for you, or can you do that yourself, right? And the need, the sense that it's even necessary in the first place to play this game where you're like, oh, all these, all the people that are, all the right wing guys who are like rioting in the streets in the UK and burning cars. I mean, it's just like an innocent mistake, right? Like they just, I mean, of course they're angry because some kids got killed and stuff like that. But they're mixed up because they think this guy was a migrant and he's not a migrant. They thought this guy was it's like an innocent mistake because if they realize that this guy was born in the UK, he wasn't a migrant, and whatever happened with the murdering of children doesn't, it's not relevant to the migrant crisis. If they just understood that simple fact, they would just stop rioting. They would give up their, obviously that's not going to work, right? And it's also in the same way that if you explain to people how intersex works, how transgenderism works, how gender reassignment surgeries work, even also and how that relates to Algeria, or how that relates to conservative Muslims who probably don't like, it's kind of funny because it's like it's a complicated issue, and it seems like maybe this also goes with Mercury retrograde, and it's like that there seems to be this kind of like mass confusion around what's going on. And okay, for the sake of it, I will tell you, the story as I interpret it. I don't even know what, there could be a diverse group of people that watch my videos that think different things. But like basically it goes back, I mean, I talked about this in a video that I made before. Like the reality of gender is that gender is much more complicated than being like simply you're either male or you're female. There are a lot of intersex people out there that are biologically non-binary, right? That there's something going on with their bodies where they are not so evenly divided across from one side of the line to the other, right? And there are people who are transgender who have all the biology that fit neatly into a category, but they don't, for whatever reason, that gives them a sense of body dysmorphia. They don't feel like they have the right body, and they feel like they need gender reassignment surgery to transition to the opposite gender, regardless of what their biology is, right? At the same time, there could be people that are in between, and they, there could be a social convention which demands them to have gender reassignment surgery that makes them conform with these genders when they don't, right? Or there could be something where it's like there's a kind of a nuance here, right? And the thing is, there's something about this particular Algerian boxer who's not a trans person, which is a person who has some degree of intersex going on, which their body they have a certain thing going on with their chromosomes. They have a certain thing where their body produces a bit more testosterone. And then this has turned into this bizarre thing where you've got, it's not, the competition isn't really, nobody cares about who wins with the sports anymore. It's turned into this thing where all the spectators get to argue about what kind of genitals a person has. I just feel sorry for this Algerian boxer. It's like what a it is also kind of funny because it's like they're basically arguing the point that like you've got a bunch of right-wing people who don't like trans people, but because a person's unmodified state is not quite so binary, they want things to fit into the binary. So they it would be like saying we want this person to go through gender reassignment surgery, to go through some sort of like, I mean, it may not even make sense for this person if that's not, it's just bizarre because there's something about like, the idea that the real world we inhabit itself is weird, is mixed up, is full of multiplicities that don't conveniently fit into these binary distinctions of how what our ideas are about the world. The actual real situation is a bit messier than we would like to think, and there's something about this which is it goes with, there's this kind of split between the human and nature, right? That like nature's full of all sorts of things like gay animals, or like seahorses where the male seahorse carries the eggs or something, like the way that sex and the patterns of masculine and feminine play out in the natural world is kind of weird and mixed up, and our ideas of gender binaries are much more simplistic than what the natural world is like, right? And for some reason, well, I don't know. I've noticed that when I'm making these videos, I seem to actually be, I was taking a chance earlier by mixing in some philosophy and stuff like that, and I noticed that I'm starting to develop an audience that actually likes this stuff. So I figured I might as well just keep going. I am continuing to read Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaux. If you can see my bookmark in there, I'm nearing the end of it. When I finished the Anti-Oedipus, I recorded a video where I was giving my thoughts upon finishing the Anti-Oedipus. I don't know if I'm going to do it with this one or not. But I'm nearing the end of it. I'm still reading it. And I thought, there's something about this. I don't know. I have to admit that Deleuze and Guattari is often brought up in the context of, like feminist postmodernism or whatever, and gender studies and transgender stuff. But there's something about that. It's like what they talk about is very much not just limited to that issue, and also what if you actually take the time to read this book, you'll find that it's like the way I don't know. It's not necessarily that they go in an opposite direction or something like that, but there's much more nuance than them simply just being a tool for whatever a certain political agenda. Even if you agree with it, it's just there's more going on. There's people who will read Deleuze and Guattari and take it in a completely different direction, and there's not just one or two directions you can take it in. There's a multiplicity of directions. A very Deleuzian thing, right? That we don't. But I thought anyways that I would read some Deleuze and Guattari based on in response to some of these things that are happening. I'm just going to take a sip of coffee and catch my breath before I do so, though, because I may be reading a bit. Okay. Now what I'm doing is that I'm backtracking to the plateau called 1874, 3 novellas, or what happened. And one of the things that's interesting about Deleuze and Guattari is that, or the 1,000 Plateaus, is that each plateau has a year date attached to it. In this case, the plateau that I'm reading for the year date is 1874, and just by memory, I believe 1874 corresponds to a stock market crisis, a financial crisis that happened in 1874. And which is kind of interesting because it's like we often hear about the Great Depression, but there's one that happened in 18, or maybe I'm off a little bit. I don't know. There's certain things too where if you Google the years associated with each chapter and try to like see what the event happened that year, it can give you some kind of insight. And if you're an astrologer, you can also punch these years into your astrology charts and see if you can divinate. I don't know if they were intending for you to do that, but that's something that might be interesting, right? I have experimented with doing a little bit of this, like if there are these sort of underlying codes, like they're actually kind of quite. It's also kind of funny because in the beginning of the book they say like we won't telling you what the years mean, but just keep reading the book and you'll get it, right? But so far, I don't think they ever at any point explicitly tell you what the years mean. I think they're just kind of assuming you're going to pick it up and like do some research yourself or whatever, right? Anyway, so I'm going to read from this. Again, I think this 3 novellas or what happened. And there's something going on, whether this has to do with controversies in the Olympics or whether this has to do with various climate change related catastrophes, such as rivers getting filled up with landslides, or, just the general state of chaos and weird stuff happening. Anyways, we're just going to get into it. Here we go. It is not very difficult to determine the essence of the novella as a literary genre. Everything is organized around the question, what happened? What could have happened? The tale is the opposite of the novella because it is altogether different question that the reader asks with bated breath, what is going to happen? Something is always going to happen, come to pass. Something always happens in the novel also, but the novel integrates elements of the novella and the tale into the variation of its perpetual living present duration. The detective novel... Oh, and by the way, I also made a video already about Mars and Jupiter and Gemini, and I pointed out that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, had this exact combination of Mars and Jupiter in Gemini, and I was predicting there was going to be a certain detective element, and I think this is part of why I'm reading this, because I feel like it goes with what I've already established, my idea of this Mars-Jupiter in Gemini conjunction, and the mystery and the detective and this kind of stuff, right? The detective novel is a particularly hybrid genre in this respect, since most often the something equals X that has happened is on the order of a murder or theft, but exactly what it is that has happened remains to be discovered, and in the present determined by the model detective. For example, and this is also like the whole right-wing guys rioting in the UK, and there's something happened, which is a murder, and then the actual details of what it is that happened construed in a certain way that fits a certain narrative and fits a certain political agenda, right? Versus you could look at the same way depoliticized and maybe see something different in what happened, right? Anyways, I'll go back to reading. Yet it would be an error to reduce these different aspects to the 3 dimensions of time. Something happened, something is going to happen, can designate a past so immediate, a future so near, that they are one, as Husserl would say, with retentions and protensions of the present itself. Nevertheless, the distinction is legitimate in the view of the different movements that animate the present and are contemporaneous with it. One moves with it, another already casts it into the past from the moment it is present, novella, while another simultaneously draws it into the future, tale. We are lucky to have treatments of the same subject by a tale writer and a novella writer. 2 lovers, one of whom dies suddenly in the other's room. In Maupassant's tale, Un Ruse, an Artifice, everything revolves around these questions. What is going to happen? How will the survivor extricate himself from the situation? What will the third-party savior, in this case a doctor, think of? In Barbary d'Aurevilly's novella, Le Radeau Cramoisi, sorry if I'm pronouncing things wrong, The Crimson Curtain, everything revolves around something happened, but what? See, doesn't this seem a little relevant? Something happened, but what? That is the question. Not only because it is really not known what the cold young woman just died from, but also because it will never be known why she gave herself to the petty officer or how the third party savior, here the colonel of the regiment, was able to arrange things. It should not be thought that it is easier to leave things open-ended for there to be something that has happened that we will never know about, or even several things in a row, requires no less minute attention and precision than the contrary case, when the author must invent the details of what will need to be known. You will never know what just happened, or you will always know what is going to happen. These are the reasons for the reader's two bated breaths. In the novella and the tale, respectively, they are two ways in which the living present is divided at every instant. In the novella, we do not wait for something to happen. We expect something to have just happened. The novella is a last novella, whereas the tale is a first tale. The presence of the tale writer is completely different from that of the novella writer, and both are different from that of the novelist. Let us not dwell too much on these dimensions of time. The novella has little to do with a memory of the past or an act of reflection, quite to the contrary. It plays upon a fundamental forgetting. It evolves in the element of what happened because it places us in a relation with something unknowable and imperceptible, and not the other way around. It is not because it speaks of a past about which it can no longer provide us knowledge. It may even be that nothing has happened, but it is precisely that nothing which that makes us say, whatever could have happened to make me forget where I put my keys, or whether I mailed that letter, etc. What little blood vessel in my brain could have ruptured? What is this nothing that makes something happen? The novella has a fundamental relation to secrecy, not with a secret matter or object to be discovered, but with the form of the secret, which means impenetrable. Whereas the tale has a relation to discovery, the form of discovery, independent of what can be discovered. The novella also enacts postures of the body and mind that are like folds or envelopments, whereas the tale puts into play attributes or positions that are like unfoldings and developments, however unexpected. Barbie has an evident fondness for body posture, in other words, states of the body when it is surprised by something that just happened. In the face of the diaboliques, Barbie even suggests that there is a diabolism of body postures, a sexuality, pornography, and scatology of postures quite different from those that also simultaneously mark body attributes or positions. Posture is like inverse suspense. Thus, it is not a question of saying that the novella relates to the past and the tale of the future. We should say that instead the novella relates to the present itself, to the formal dimension of something that has happened, even if that something is nothing or remains unknowable. Similarly, one should not try to make the distinction between the novella and the tale coincide with categories such as the fantastic, the fabulous, etc. That is another problem. There's no reason why that should overlap. The links of the novella are what happened, the modality or expression, secrecy, the form, body posture, the content. Now, I'm just going to skip to the third novella, and I have also prefaced this that I have not read any of these novellas. I don't know the source material. So I'm just reading. So, I mean, you know, maybe I'd do a better job of this if there's so much source material that these guys draw on. Sometimes you just have to, like, you know, this could inspire me to go and actually try to read the novella that they're referencing, right? But this I feel like this is relevant to a number of things going on. I'm just going to start reading it, and you can see why. The third novella is The Story of the Abyss and the Spyglass by Pierrette Fleutiaux. I don't know if I'm not good with pronunciation of French names. Forgive me, Pierrette. So anyways, Some segments are more or less near and others more or less distant. The segments seem to encircle an abyss, a kind of huge black hole. On each segment there are two kinds of lookouts, near-seers and far-seers. What they watch for are the movements, outbursts, infractions, disturbances, and rebellions occurring in the abyss. But there is a major difference between the two types of lookouts. The near-seers have a simple spyglass. In the abyss, they see the outline of gigantic cells, great binary divisions, dichotomies, well-defined segments of the type classroom, barracks, low-income housing project, or even countryside seen from an airplane. They see branches, chains, rows, columns, dominoes, striae. Once in a while, along the edges, they discover a misshapen figure or a shaky contour. Then they bring out the terrible ray telescope. It is used not to see with, but to cut out shapes. This geometrical instrument, which emits a laser beam, assumes the dominion of the great signifying break everywhere and restores the momentarily threatened molar order. The cutting telescope overcodes everything. It acts on flesh and blood, but itself is nothing but pure geometry as a state affair, and the near-seer's physics in the service of that machine. What is geometry? What is the state? And what are the near-seers? These are meaningless questions. I am speaking literally, because it is not so much a question of defining something as effectively drawing a line. Not a line of writing, but a line of rigid segmentarity along which everyone will be judged and rectified according to his or her contours, individual or collective. Very different is the situation of those with long-distance vision, the farseers with all their ambiguities. These are very few of them, at most one per segment. Their telescopes are complex and refined, but they are in no way leaders. And what they see is entirely different from what others see. They see a whole micro-segmentarity, details of details, a roller coaster of possibilities, tiny movements that have not reached the edge, lines or vibrations that start to form long before there are outline shapes, segments that move by jerks, a whole rhizome, a molecular segmentarity that does not permit itself to be overcoated by a signifier like the cutting machine, or even to be attributed to a given figure, a given aggregate or element. This second line is inseparable from the anonymous segmentation that produces it and challenges everything all the time without goal or reason. What happened? The far-seers can divine the future, but always in the form of a becoming of something that has already happened in a molecular matter, unfindable particles. The situation is the same in biology. The giant cellular divisions and dichotomies with their contours are accompanied by migrations, invaginations, displacements, and morphogenic impulses whose segments are marked not by localizable points, but by thresholds of intensity passing underneath mitosis that scramble everything, and molecular lines that intersect each other with the large-scale cells and between their breaks. The situation is the same in society. Rigid segments and overcutting segments are cross-cut underneath by segmentations of another nature. But this is neither one nor the other, neither biology or a society. It is resemblance between the two. I am speaking literally. I am drawing lines, lines of writing, and life passes between the lines. A line of supple segmentarity formed and became entangled with the other, but it was a very different kind of line, shakily drawn by the micropolitics of the farseers. It is a political affair, worldwide in scope as the other, but on a scale and in a form as that is incommensurable, non-superposable, but is also a perceptual affair. For perception always goes hand in hand with semiotics, practice, politics, theory. One sees, speaks, and thinks on a given scale and according to a given line that may or may not conjugate with another's line, even if the other's is still oneself. It does not, then you should not insist that you should not argue.
You should flee. Flee even saying as you go, okay, okay, you win. There's no use talking. You first have to change telescopes, mouths and teeth, all the segments. Not only does one speak literally, one also lives literally. In other words, following lines, whether connectable or not, even heterogeneous ones. Sometimes it doesn't work when they are homogeneous. The ambiguity of the farseer situation is that they are able to detect the slightest micro-infraction in the abyss. Things that the others do not see, they also observe. Beneath it, apparent geometrical justice. The dreadful damage caused by the cutting telescope. They feel as though they foresee things and are ahead of the others because they can see the smallest thing as already having happened. But they know that their warnings are to no avail because the cutting telescope will set everything straight without being warned, without the need for possibility or of prediction. At times they feel that they do indeed see something that others do not, but at other times that what they see differs only in degrees and serves no purpose. Although they are collaborators with the most rigid and cruelest project of control, how could they not feel a vague sympathy for the subterranean activity revealed to them? An ambiguity in the molecular line as if vacillated between the two sides. One day, what will have happened, a farseer will abandon his or her segment and start walking across the narrow overpass to above the dark abyss, will break his or her telescope and depart on a line of flight to meet a blind double approaching from the other side. I'll stop there. So, I mean, there's a lot going on, but, and like I said, I haven't read the source material, but the idea of two types of seeing, near seers and far seers, right? And that the idea is that from a certain perspective, you've got the, you know, if you like, I think about this, like going into, let's say, if you're talking about like whether a human being, right? A human being from a near-seeing approach may be non-binary. They're what's going on in their body, what's going on in their blood, what's going on with their chromosomes, what's going on with their genitals even. You know, it may be more complex than a simple binary distinction between masculine and feminine, right? And there's a certain controversy in, you know, I mean, this is there's an issue that one of the things about this is like, it's like the culture war stuff, is that like the culture war around gender binaries or gender non-binaries. And I'm a person who, I'm completely fine. I mean, I don't have to bring in my own, that's just a distraction to get into my own stuff. I'm happy having a male body, but I think that their gender is maybe more complicated than just being conforming to a simple binary or not, right? I think there's more. There's a view from the near that sees things. There's all sorts of potentials for coloring outside the lines, right? For doing things differently. But from the farseer position, you've got a telescope that's doesn't just see. It's a laser beam which cuts, right? So from the point of view, like, you could go your whole life being, you know, like, whether or not you want to express, there's a whole issue about like trans visibility or, you know, intersex visibility, whether trans people have the right to like dress the way they want to, express their gender identity, all that. But what we're talking about is something completely different. We're talking about the biology of a person, which could be a secret, could be something which is kept hidden, which is private, that people don't know about, and is on this, like, the only people who would detect it would be like the near seers. And then from the near side of the view, it's like you see all sorts of stuff. The seahorses, the male seahorses carries the eggs rather than the female. It's all, from the nearsighted point of view, it's all mixed up. It's like a chaotic multiplicity, and I feel this very much goes with the Jupiter and Gemini, because the twins, it has to do with the mutableness, the mutable collectivity, the mutable multiplicity, the things that can possibly even change from one thing to another, right? And or what could be obscured, what could be hidden, a secret. But if you from the far side position, the farseers see more, but they see with this view of, if you think about, like, if you take, let's say, like an emanationist approach, right? If you take an emanationist approach where the immanent world is immensely complex, we live in a world of overwhelming complexity, right? But from an emanationist point of view, you've got the fall from the Garden of Eden, or you've got in other forms, you've got like a unity, you've got an undivided unity which precedes all things. You have the first distinction between being and non-being, right? And this first distinction, there's this thing what people talk about in terms of the divine masculine and the divine feminine is like the yin and the yang of the I Ching, right? You've got this idea that your whole world is governed by this kind of like binary computer system, right? And that the thing about the yin and the yang is that they get assigned these gender polarities, but they're really something that's much more elemental than that, right? And there is something about how we can say, like, between the immanent world that we live in and what Plato talked about as the world of forms, a very basic thing you could look at, like the animals, right? That we live in a world where you have dogs and cats and chickens and horses, and there are many of these animals, but one common form that they all take, right? And this gives the idea that even in our immanent world, we can see that there are, while the individual animal may be born and die and be impermanent, there is a pattern or a form which is closer to the eternal, because for thousands of years there have been countless numbers of these different types of animals, but that form itself is not completely eternal, because with our scientific understanding, we've understood that these forms of themselves are subject to a process of evolution, right? They're of a tree of life, right? Like that you can trace all mammals back to some common mammal ancestor, and then you can see these, that all these things came from the same life that crawled out of the ocean or whatever, right? And that we have this evolutionary way of understanding how things happened, which is still very complex, but from this basic idea of like metaphysical principles, that you can have this this basic binary between this and that, which is but the thing is, when you there's some sort of conflict between having this sort of like abstract principle of being and non-being, yes and no, and then looking at a world of incredible complexity and multiplicity, and then using this long distance laser beam to basically to enforce. If you have this is the thing, you don't want to be the person who's captured under the sights of this laser beam, whereas before you yourself were a complex creature that did not neatly fit into you're existing in this world of animal multiplicity, right? Where you are part of this infinite complexity of the immanent world, but the laser beam operates on this simple, we're going to cut, we're going to separate, we're going to categorize. And the problem about the Olympics is that if you're competing in the Olympics, you're subjecting yourself to this process of we're going to select the very best athlete by putting them through these trials, these competitions, and so we can have a clear distinction between who the gold medalist is, who the silver medalist is, who the bronze medalist are, and you're in some way you are, and also the long distance, because you're making yourself into a spectacle for the whole world, right? And now the whole, the regime, it's if there's a certain thing about like, you don't want to put yourself in this position where there's some ideological weapon which is targeting itself on you, asking, are you a male or female? Are you a migrant or were you born here? Are you black or white? Do you identify as a black person or do you identify as an Indian person? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, right? The interrogating, and like if you this is people who are, the idea that in each person there could be I've been doing this IFS therapy where if you look at yourself, yourself could be, rather than just a singular person, you could have a multiplicity of different parts, right? Like maybe there's a person who's considering whether they want to be trans or not, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe is it true that there's just one singular essential self, or is it possible that you have a whole multiplicity of different selves that are somehow working together to try to form a coherent identity to present to the world, but underneath the surface there's all sorts of things going on, right? There's like a chaos of multiplicity, and there's also in this multiplicity there's opportunity to go off in all kinds of creative different directions, right? But then the problem is you don't want the people with the spotlight on the watchtower to find you and then arrest you into this sort of like, you've got some sort of long scale pattern that if you don't conform to that pattern, the laser beam is gonna fucking like saw your arm off or something like that, right? All your parts, you may have all these, it may be like, there's this idea of no bad parts or whatever, right? Like you can have all sorts of different parts and be like all sorts of different influence that come together to make you into the person that you are. But then there is this weird binary logic that basically saws you in half. That takes people and rips them apart, and this is the acceptable person to present to the world, and this is the people that we have to exclude, right? And it could also be these are the people we accept into our community, and these are the people we need to exile and outcast. These are the people who are valid to compete as athletes because they conform to this idea that we have about what gender is, and the fact that you don't want to be the person who becomes under that target where it's not even, does anybody care? I mean, I don't know. I don't give a shit who wins a fucking gold medal for boxing, but there's certain things where it becomes, this is obviously not just about sports. This is about a whole culture war, a whole war of ideology that you don't want to put yourself in the targeting sites for, right? And because of this, I've just like, maybe it's better just not to get, my strategy so far has been rather than getting involved in really hyper reactive social media posting where it's just like these little chirpy tweets back and forth of like, you're just like giving yourself to the hyper reactivity machine. I'm at least trying to, if you're going to take the time to watch me talk about this for a whole hour, you're at least committing your time to appreciating the complexity of things. Because the thing about like when you reduce everything down to this like the way that, think about this binary thing, right? That's how computers work. Binary code. You've got processors which stream through a whole bunch of ones and zeros, right? And there's something about the human soul which is indivisible, right? There's something about that unity that is like, you're like, if you're making yourself into a data point that can be categorized as male or female, migrant or citizen, black person or Indian person or white person. I mean, like, that's not a binary, right? But you're taking it's essentially like making yourself into a data point which is fed into a machine computer, and you have a whole computerized system of control. And it's like, if you don't neatly fit into the 1 or the 0, you're just going to get caught. You're just going to get, caught in the cogs of the machine, right? And this is, in some respect, this is, I think, why the Wachowskis really played up. Or, I mean, there's a whole thing about the Wachowskis going trans and Trinity in the Matrix, and the whole message of the Matrix being like about going beyond the binary, right? Or that the binary itself is the red pill, blue. I mean, and then you get into the whole, the bastardization of all of where that's been taken, which I try to tend to avoid. I try to tend to avoid the pill conversations. You know what I'm talking about, because I don't want to be involved with that scene. But then again, it's like another thing. Again, like just taking. I feel like there's, the issue with like stereotypes. Again, you've got people you've got a diverse multiplicity of people, but you've got an internet culture which instead doesn't deal with people anymore. It deals with blobs. It deals with these like the masses of people are solidified into these like, you're not even taking shots at people anymore. You're taking shots at memes of like symbols. We have symbols that are created so that they work in a computer system to work for a control apparatus, and that the more we just, you have to, if this is what a liberal is, you have to conform with the idea of what a liberal is, so that your data point makes sense in the machine. And then if you do anything that's if you confuse the machine and they're like, we don't get it. Are you a liberal, or you're not fitting into our idea of what you're supposed to be? The more you start to do, you don't want to get cut in half, torn in two by some laser beam that can't handle the ambiguity of a non-binary situation, right? And it's like, I think, I don't know. That's what's weird about the internet, is it's like you've got masses of people with their like high range laser beam weapons going to a laser war about like what's the right thing to think about this boxer? What's the right thing to think about, what's going on with like Kamala Harris? What's the right thing to think about climate change? Or what's the right thing to think about like vaccines or something, right? And if you like, which side are you on? And if you're not, if you don't make yourself clearly understandable by a computer, either you are invisible, you don't exist to that system, or that system is going to like tear you apart, basically. And Mars and Jupiter, Mars is about cutting, Mars is about separating, and we're in this Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini, which is all about multiplicities, all about diversity, all about variety as the spice of life, and it's going to get pretty spicy. So, I don't know. This is my attempt anyways at dealing with the current events in the news. So, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more. Doot-do-loot-do. Keep on rocking in the free world. Bye.